Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Unconquered podcast. Today, I have an amazing special guest, student entrepreneur, a senior at NYU, Aidan McDowell. He started a awesome AI e-learning company called UniqLearn. Aidan, I just want to toss it over to you. I know that we had a conversation probably 6 or so weeks ago. You reached out regarding a conference, and we really connected well. But for everyone listening, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself, about your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Sean, for having me on. This is definitely super cool. First podcast. So super excited. But yeah, like you said, I'm a senior at NYU. I'm in the School of Individualized Study, which is very much in line with what we're trying to do over at UniqLearn. And so my concentration is business, psychology, and education. And I guess I've always been interested in psychology. Back when I was around 15 years old, I I wanted to kind of go down a more clinical route, do therapy and that kind of work. And then I kind of thought, I might get a little bored with that. Let me think of something else to do. And I was like, all right, what do I hate? I was like, I hate school. And so I was like, okay, why do I hate school? And so I kind of just started asking myself more and more questions. And as the years go on and you stick with something, you start to ask yourself better questions. And when you start asking better questions, it kind of leads you to talking to more and more people, and you kind of start cracking at that egg a little more and peeling back the layers of the onion. Um, and so that's led me here. And NYU has served as a great resource for meeting people and doing research and building connections. And so, yeah, that's where we're at.
So before we talk about UniqLearn, you raised a couple really important topics, at least to me, topics I'm interested in. It seems to me that people somehow attract like-minded people no matter what you do. So I have a similar story too, where I was interested in psychology and my parents taught me out of it. Now I ended up doing, AI, but also I'm kind of a brand strategist, AI entrepreneur as well, which has, strategy, marketing, all has kind of some psychology based things inside of it. But you brought up asking yourself questions and asking why did you hate school. um what kind of answer did you come to?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that one of the biggest things that I preach and I talk about, and I talk about it personally and professionally, is curiosity. And I had a really transformational experience in one of my first classes at NYU. It was a curiosity research seminar, and the name of the class was Curiosity: colon Uncertainty, Inquiry, and Discovery. And I was fascinated by that, and I ended up doing my final project on exploring those three steps, and basically coming to the conclusion that in order to be truly curious, you must get to each of those three, right? You have to be uncertain about something. You have to then ask a question about that uncertainty, and then the final step is to actually embark on a journey to figure out the answer, right? And you might not always figure it out. In fact, most times you won't, but you'll learn so much through actually asking those questions and being thoughtful about the questions you're asking. Um, and like I said, as you start asking questions, you're going to start asking better ones, and so that's going to lead you to those learning moments. Um, and so, what was your question?
I was going to say, what answer popped in your mind? Why did you dislike education or dislike going to school?
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess for me, I never really struggled in school. I was, very grateful to have had good experiences and great teachers and things like that. So it was less about the performance and more about the the practical application of what I was learning and the boredom that I experienced. And so as we'll kind of get into with UniqLearn, I mean, you just learn about things that you don't care about, and it's not, you don't have to dive deep into the science to understand that it's hard to engage in something and put a lot of effort and energy into something that you just really don't care about. And so that to me, I'm big on like I'm a pretty logical thinker. I think pretty black and white. And so to me, I'm sitting there, I'm like, why are we forcing students to learn about things for, what is it, 18, 20 years about things that they don't care about? It seemed illogical to me.
No, I think I share some of that frustration. I actually really enjoyed school. I love learning, whether I use it or not. I think for me, one of the one of the important points of like where it comes from an educational standpoint is why aren't we, it's one thing to learn things that everyone may not use, but why aren't we being taught some of the most important things? And I don't want to digress too much, but just financial literacy, for example. Um,
Yep. Yep.
there's so many important topics that just get um, glossed over, especially in the public education system. And some things are very subtle. I was listening to someone talk about when you go to a public school, you might get like, there's this big, I'm sure you know about it because you're in the industry even more so than me, but there's this big push, I'd say probably 10, 12 years ago when I was in school of, making everything word problems, even in math, right? It'd be like if you have three
Yep.
apples and you give two away, how many apples do you have
Yep.
left? Well, so this was someone from Europe. So I don't know if it's this way in the United States, but they were saying when they went to a public school in Europe, that's how the questions were worded, which was very similar to what I grew up with. And she said that her brother had the opportunity to go to a private school in Europe. And in the private school, it didn't say Susie had three apples and gave two away. How many did she have left? It said something
Hmm.
like Susie owned three companies and sold two of them for $200 million.
Yep.
How many companies did she have left, and how much money did she make selling her companies? And it was this very like
Yep.
subtle,
Yep.
like owner versus consumer or producer versus consumer mindset shift that's ingrained at at a young age. And I'm sitting here wondering, like, you know, the Bell system, for example, is built from the old manufacturing plants. That's why, like, in public schools, as far
Yep.
as I know, still to this day, the bell rings and you move classes. Well, that was the same thing. It was built around conditioning young people to go work in a manufacturing plant because when the bell rang, you moved to the other assembly line.
Yep.
And maybe if you can expand a little bit on that, and maybe how your company is working to maybe change or at least have a positive influence on some of those factors when it comes to our public education system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up two really relevant and important points, and so the first one being the subtle differences, and the second one being that I'll go into after, which is kind of the how we can compare the Industrial Revolution to the AI revolution, and the impact that that has on education. So to start with the subtleties, um, I'm big on it's a quote from Albert Einstein. He said, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." And so, you can take that to mean a bunch of different things. To me, it means there are aspects of people's behavior that give us deep insight into how they learn and how we can help them that we cannot quantify. And the education system is so heavily quantified, right? It's so standardized. It's so, oh, what are the scores on this test? If you get these scores, you get this amount of money for your school. If you get these scores, you can go to these colleges. It's so numbers based. And I'm a numbers guy. I love numbers,
Mhm.
but it's not all there. And so that subtle difference of Susie buying three apples and eating two of them, or Susie selling three companies or having three companies and selling two of them, those are important differences, right? Because all of a sudden you're taking this math about apples that you'll probably never do, and you're putting it in a context that is actually very, very relevant and intellectually stimulating. And so to answer your question of how UniqLearn addresses that, we cater learning to each student's interests and to how they learn. And we really emphasize making knowledge applicable. And so one of the kind of the phrases that I always say is, I want to teach people how to learn, not what to know, right? And so right now, the way the education system is structured is students are passive listeners of information, and they're not active engagers in learning. And we can talk about why that is, whether it's money, whether it's teacher to student ratio, whatever it may be. That's how it is right now, and that's where the struggle is coming from. To go to the second thing, the industrial revolution versus the AI revolution, I think of it in one simple way. The industrial revolution was a time of mass production, right? That was the first time that we could build things at a large scale. They were the same thing, but we could build them at a large scale for everyone. What AI has now allowed us to do with generative AI and advanced machine learning models and things like that is we can now create unique things at a mass scale for everyone, right? And so I think that there's a lot of correlation with the Industrial Revolution to education at that time, and where I hope to move education in parallel to the AI revolution. And so I also think that it's important to highlight the needs that people needed to fulfill in society, right? 200 years ago, 100, 200 years ago, even before the Industrial Revolution, things that we needed from people to be able to do to help their communities thrive are much different than the things we need now. There's so much automation now. There's so many tedious tasks that we don't need to worry about. And so I think that where we're headed is we need experts. We need people that can critically think about issues, that can challenge issues, and not necessarily just sit there and complete the same mundane task over and over again. Because the reality of the situation is those tasks won't exist. There, so many of them are already done for us, and more of them will continue to be done for us. And so that's why I think the specialization of education is super important, and understanding each student's strengths and where they care about going and helping them do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you bring up, I love the analogy because I make the same analogy, at least industrial versus the AI revolution. And, you know, I'm like you, as most, I think entrepreneurs have to be, right? I tend to end up on the more positive, optimistic end of this spectrum. However, how I got into AI, um, so my company is a little bit different. We're aimed at revolutionizing the healthcare industry, basically through three verticals: revenue cycle, operations, quality, and patient experience. But about a year ago, when ChatGPT kind of first launched last November, I was working for corporate America. I was dealing with a very difficult client, and my partner had basically promised them something that was virtually impossible. What it equated to was 3 million plus individual models, then all added together to get one singular output. And I had done that type of work, doing up to probably 1,000 individual models and then adding them all together. And I told my partner, I said, there's just way too much. The amount of manpower it's going to take to do 3 million of these and then add them all up, basically just using a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. I said, it's going to break Excel. It's not going to be possible to be done in Excel. Two, the amount of manpower. And three, you think about 3 million individual models and all adding them up together. I said, the room for human error it's just insane. Like it's not
Yeah.
impossible, but for the resources we've been given, it's virtually impossible, right? And so we decided, okay, let's get on the phone with the client. Let's kind of explain. Let's come to some kind of compromise. And the client was like, no, you said you could deliver this. Like, some of the other big accounting firms do it differently, and they can deliver this because I've worked with them, and it's in our contract. Like, we paid you. Like, you figure it out. And um, I had never not delivered, and I don't fail. Like failure is just not part of my vocabulary. And so I said, okay, let me think about it. And essentially, I had a theory of a different way of doing the there's 6 plus 6 equals 12, but so does 10 plus 2, right? So I had a theory of doing it a different way, and I got with our data analytics team, and I knew SQL code from way back when, and I essentially figured out how to do it through an automated process that was not exactly machine learning, but very similar to machine learning. And that's when it hit me. I went several years unconcerned about AI, about machine learning, because I said to myself, I'm in mergers and acquisitions. Every deal is different. I work in the healthcare industry. It's very regulated. It's very nuanced. It's highly complex. There's no way in hell my job could ever be close to automated. And then I automated it, and it hit me like a sack of bricks. I thought, if if this is possible, then my job can be automated. And I don't want to go through my whole story, but that's essentially what kicked off this idea of this analogy of the industrial revolution versus the AI revolution. I think what's scary in a way, or concerning, or should concern people if they're not really staying on top of their careers, is history forgets the people. And there were definitely people who said, hey, that Model T is nice, but man, it's expensive. And, it kind of breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
The wheels aren't great. I'm going to stick with my horse and buggy. And those people starved. Okay. That's what happened to those people. And back then, it was over the industrial jobs. Today, it's going to affect every job. And the best way I can give an analogy is, it's like a custom suit, but an affordable. It's like a custom suit at the same price point or a lower price point than an off the rack suit. Think about that.
Yeah.
And if you don't know
Yeah.
how to use
100%.
AI, if you're not, learning new skills, and if you're not doing exactly what you said, learning how to learn and learning how to learn efficiently so that you can bring on a new skill set and adapt. I made a prediction last November that there's going to be layoffs, mass layoffs every 6 months for at least 3 to 5 years, until a third of our jobs were basically gone. Now, I know they're coming back, but they're coming back with, you're going to need an entirely different skill set. So, the same job you have now isn't coming back. And
Yeah.
so far, I've been correct. We've had layoffs, mass layoffs in the United States, January 2023, May, June 2023, and then LinkedIn came out. They have a big tracker of even LinkedIn had a big riff, and we're going through it again right now into year 2023. That's probably going to go through January
Yeah.
2024.
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's huge, and the implications are, you know, across all industries. I read an article this morning at the gym about school districts that are not kind of welcoming AI and how they're putting their students at a disadvantage.
Mhm.
And not only are they putting their students at a disadvantage, they're putting their teachers at a disadvantage. I mean, I think we all at this point understand the struggles of being a teacher, and whether we talk about pay or time or resources and things like that. I mean, there's just issues all across the board. We are at the point in history with the lowest teacher satisfaction rate, um, and studies have shown that. And over 55% of teachers report that if they could go back and tell their younger selves to not teach, they would. And so the problem there is that studies have also shown that the number one predictor of student success is quality of teacher. And so if
Mhm.
teachers are hating their job and they don't want to do their jobs, and all of a sudden we have this shortage of teachers, and so now we need to bring in teachers that are of less quality than the ones we would have brought in before, now the students are struggling because of it, you know? And so there's so many things with AI. There's so many things within education. And the thing that really scares me about education is it has always been the slowest industry to adopt new developments.
I don't know
And
about that, man.
considering the kind of
Healthcare is pretty slow too.
yeah, I
I
mean
think healthcare and education go hand in hand.
one of the slowest. Yeah, one of the slowest. Then we can say. Um, yeah, I mean it's been one of the slowest to adopt new developments, and especially with the stigma around AI and the fear that people have about it. Um, you know, we're seeing these school districts come out and say we're not touching AI. Where if
Mhm.
you want to use it, you have to send your student home with a permission slip. I mean, that's a real thing. There are permission slips going home to use ChatGPT. Um, and this fear comes from a lack of
Which is
understanding and a lack of
mind-boggling,
education.
which is mind-boggling to me because you know what they are really quick to pick up on were the
Mm.
iPads. And I told my wife,
Yeah.
I want to send my daughter to private school. And I said the second they give her an iPad, because they started giving these kids iPads at like kindergarten, no, like kindergarten. I'm like, the second they give my child an iPad, I'm pulling her out. It's been
Yeah.
it's been proven that getting on the tablets, getting on the iPhones and the iPads is not good for education. It's not good for your brain. You become easily distracted.
Yep.
And did you know that Steve Jobs, who is one of my people that I kind of try to role model some of the way that I run my company, at least take the good and leave the bad. But when he first came out with the iPad, he said, this is going to revolutionize education. And they had this great marketing campaign that got iPads in the classrooms, and they got them in classrooms quickly. And maybe that's a good case study for you
Hmm.
to learn from, because they were good. They were good at getting
Yeah.
education to adopt quickly. But then he was on some news. You can go look it up. He was on, I don't know if it was 2020 or CNN or whatever. He was being interviewed, and they asked him, like, "Hey, what does your daughter use the iPad for?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" Um, uh, my daughter doesn't use iPads. We don't have technology in our home. And if you actually go
Yeah.
research Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
a lot of those Google, Apple tech executives, they send their kids to a special school where they only teach the Socratic method, and everything's by
Yep.
hand. Um, and so
Yep.
one thing that I think though that where like your system could be super unique, and I was going to bring up, for me, I've actually become more analog as a leader, as a AI entrepreneur, but then I come back to using AI tools as a complement to what I come up with on my own,
Yeah.
just writing out in my journal.
Hmm.
So I'll write stuff out in my journal,
Yep.
and then I'll type it up inside of Chat GPT or whatever uh, tool is best for what task I'm trying to tackle, and I'll kind of get Chat GPT's opinion or evaluation on what I'm doing. Typically, it's like ad copy or email outreach or grammar inside of some type of blog or stuff like that. Um,
Yep.
because being an entrepreneur, you can get kind of lonely. It's almost like having your own little virtual assistant to give you a second opinion.
Yeah. 100%. And I think two things there that I'd like to respond to. The first is the Silicon Valley people. So I don't know if you've read any of Malcolm Gladwell books, Outliers or Talking to Strangers or any of those.
I have.
They're phenomenal. If you haven't, okay, cool. For those of you listening, if you haven't, I highly suggest it. But I think it was in Outliers. He interviewed one of the Google execs who was at the forefront of the infinite scroll development. And so infinite scroll is the idea that if you're on Instagram or you're on TikTok or anything, you can scroll forever without having to go to a next page, right? And
Yep.
so the idea being it eliminates the decision of having to continue, right? Whereas if you go to Google, you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you have to go to the next one. And so he said that when he was developing that, he realized the harm that that could cause, and he actually tried to stop it in Google. And this is a top high ranking executive at Google. He tried to stop it, and they essentially outed him, and so he ended up leaving Google. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a theme that these people that are developing these technologies don't allow their kids or their loved ones to use it because they know the harm that underlies them, and so it's very interesting. Um, and then the second thing, so you mentioned writing things down, and then kind of going to AI to supplement that. And so, do you know who Paul Graham is?
I if I do, I'm blanking on the name. Tell me more.
So he's the if I'm not mistaken, he's the founder of Y Combinator. Um,
Okay. Okay.
and so he Yeah, yeah. And so he has written a bunch of essays. If you go on like paulgraham.com or whatever it is, there's a bunch of essays on there. And one of my favorites is putting ideas into words. And it's a short read, but essentially the concept is when you write, the things that actually end up on the paper were not already in your head, right? Like no one goes to write something with the fully developed sentence or page in their head, right? You kind of go with an idea, and as you write, the words kind of come out. And so the thought is when you write, you think of things that you never even thought of, right? And so
Hmm.
and writing is such a powerful tool for thinking, and the automation that the AI is giving us in doing that is taking that away. And so it is really important to embrace AI and understand its use cases, but also maintain the integral parts of human thinking and human thought.
Yeah, because I where I am in my journey of entrepreneurship, it requires a lot of my work to market myself, market my company. Um, we fortunately have broken past. We've taken on a client or a few clients, small handful, and we've made a little bit of revenue, but we're still not at the point of scale where I can afford, a social media team and a marketing team and and hire all these people. I have a small team. It's three people really that work more, you know, full time. Three people full time, and then a couple others who are more commission based, more part time. But um I've realized, for SEO purposes and stuff like that, I'll use AI, Chat GPT or Chat GPT and Views tools to help me write blog posts more quickly.
Yep.
And I've noticed though, the more that I lean on those tools without myself, really writing, like I don't want to use the word dumber, but it feels like I lose brain cells because then I like almost like I'll sit
Yeah.
and think and be like, okay, well, like what should I write now to, for this advertisement or this post or whatever, and I'll start to kind of have I'll go blank more often than I used to.
Yeah.
Some of that I think is just decision fatigue as a leader, but yeah, you have to be careful because like if you start using something as a crutch, it almost is like a drug, right? Like so, and that's and the reason I want to bring this up is this is not to point out like to say like Silicon Valley executives are evil or bad, because the same goes for drugs, man. Like I knew people in my high school who got hooked on certain drugs, ecstasy, for example, and it's known that that drug for whatever reason like changes your brain chemistry because it floods you with serotonin, which is your pleasure um
Mhm.
hormone, and the more you flood it with serotonin, now you can't produce the serotonin yourself, and so like they basically end up like
Mhm.
with fried brains and super depressed because they can't produce their own serotonin anymore, um which
Mhm.
that's kind of like using AI as a crutch, right? You kind of kill your own creativity in some ways. Another good example would be rap artists. Like, and I'm not hating on rap music. I like some rap music, but it's been more than one. Like they've interviewed like Snoop Dogg and 50 Cent and even Eminem, and they ask like, oh, like, hey, what does your kid think of your new album? And they all say the same thing. What do you mean, my kid? I don't let my child listen to my music. And they're like, you don't let your kid listen to your
Yeah.
music? And they're like, hell no, because it's not for kids. It's
Yeah.
and so like it doesn't mean that that rap artist is evil per se, or that the Silicon Valley executives are evil or bad. It just means that like it's a tool, right? It's a tool. And
Yeah.
I use the analogy of a hammer. You can create a masterpiece, you can build with a hammer, but you know what you can also do? You can go destroy something beautiful with a hammer too. So,
Yeah.
with that being said, when it comes to UniqLearn, what is your vision of AI in the classroom, of like what UniqLearn is doing as a tool to help students get this kind of custom tailored education?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, our mission at UniqLearn is to individualize education based on the premise that we all learn differently, but we're forced to learn the same way. And so what we
Mm-hmm.
do is we create learning profiles for each student that map out their learning and thought processes. So you can think of it essentially as a digital blueprint of a student's mind, right? And so, kind of in parallel to that, we are building a hub of generative AI models that take those profiles along with the standard or the topic as an input, and as an output, will generate uniquely tailored assignments and activities for each student based on how they learn and what they're interested in. And so, there's kind of three key things that we're looking to hit here, and all of these three are seeing sharp declines in the negative direction. So the first would be performance. Just kind of get that one out there. We ranked 22nd on PISA scores in 2018. And for those of you who don't know, PISA is a test that all OECD countries, so essentially developed countries, take. And it assesses 15-year-olds, randomly selected 15-year-olds, on their ability to practically apply science, English, and math. So it's not your typical standard test. It does assess more practical application. To what extent? I mean, we could argue, but we ranked 22nd. And we spend the I think it's like the third most money on education, if it's not first or second. And then also with performance, since COVID, students require an additional 4.1 months of extra learning to reach pre-COVID achievement levels. So not only are we performing worse, but it's actually taking longer for students to learn things. And so the idea behind UniqLearn and how we improve performance is, I mean, everything we do is science backed. Every input that goes in to these profiles and these outputs, it has a significant body of literature supporting it. And even just to start with the simple one is interest, right? There's a ton of evidence showing that interest increases performance in education. And this kind of leads us into the second one, which is engagement, right? Um, about 54% of students report being totally disengaged at school. And so interest really aims to drive that, right? And making things dynamic and active. And like I said, not being passive receivers of information, but active engagers in learning. And so the assignments and activities that we generate really prompt students to go out and interact with the knowledge that they're using. And then the last one is enjoyment. I mean, you asked me why I kind of went down this path, and my answer was I didn't like school, right? And unfortunately, that's the answer for about half of students that studies show. And if we can kind of wrap learning and valuable knowledge around things that they want to do and things that they care about doing, we can drive that enjoyment rate up, and you drive enjoyment rate up, you drive engagement up, you drive engagement up, you drive performance up. So they kind of all work in tandem with one another.
You know what? What is super great about that model is it really incorporates the student themselves and what they like, what they're interested in. Um, a lot of research would suggest too that like boredom and play, learning how to play, especially at a young age without external stimulus, is extremely important. In fact, when I reflect back on my
Yep.
life, I actually am thankful that the internet really had not proliferated until I was about 7 years old. I remember 7 years old is when the internet came into my home and it made weird noises. It still came on the AOL disc in the mailbox. You probably don't even remember that if you were even born. If I'm being honest,
No.
do you remember that? So for me, the
No,
internet
not at
came
all.
the internet for me came every 3 months on an AOL CD-ROM disc in the mail, and that's
That's
where you got like the
hysterical.
updates. And um, with your age, do you know what dial-up is?
Mhm.
So, like when the internet first came out, so you've heard the term broadband, right?
Yeah.
So when the internet first came out, it was on the telephone lines, and it was called dial-up. And like so, if I remember if I was on the internet, and you're probably too young to remember LimeWire or Napster, which is how we used to basically steal music, which led to the iPod and then the iPhone. But essentially, you could download music off the internet on this program called Napster, and it also give you your computer a ton of viruses. But if someone called your house, it would kick you off the internet because the internet and the phone line it used the same connection to connect you. And
Yeah.
I bring it up because it made these weird noises. Like I can't even redo it, but it made these weird noises as it was dialing up on the phone line to connect to the internet. But I bring that up because I still had like a childhood off the internet, and I think
Yeah.
that really is helpful for what I do. Because I tend to be a bridge. I tend to be like I have a vast network, and I tend to bridge the younger generation and the older generation. Um, because there's still a lot of common similarities, and I typically remind the older generation that everything you hate in the younger generation is your fault. You need to go look in the mirror because you created these technologies
Yeah.
and then proliferated them and made them a priority in these younger generations' lives. Um, but I don't want to digress too much. What I'm really trying to say is everyone learns differently, and I have a powerful story. One of my best friends was a C student, and he only made C's because he wanted to play basketball, right? So you had to pass to play basketball. So, and his whole life he was told he was dumb, and he didn't go to college, or he dropped out early, and finally something switched in him, and he decided, you know what, like, um, I'm going to go to school. But I lived with him for a short term, and what I realized was he was an auditory learner. In fact, he was such an auditory learner, he could multitask. He could play video games, for example, and listen to books on Audible. And I kid you not, man, he could basically retell you an entire Game of Thrones, like 1,000-page novel, almost word for word, listening to it one time. I'm very smart, but I'm a reader, right? And so, like, historically, people who could read were really good at school because that's what you were told to do. You read the textbook, you memorize the answers, you come to class, you regurgitate the answers from the textbook. Um, I'm jealous of his skill set because if I listen to a book on Audible, I can't be doing anything else. I have to be really active listening. I can't be multitasking.
Yeah.
And so think about if I had his skill set, how many books I could get through in a year because I could be doing all the other things that I'm doing and just listening. Um, so when he found out he was an auditory learner, he went back to college, made straight A's, and is now a history teacher. But if he's that smart, that type of aptitude, and other people who don't even go back to school and find their passion how much talent are we losing out on based on the classical form of education that's, read, memorize, and regurgitate? Think about that.
Ton.
I mean,
I
do you
mean,
have any thoughts there?
ton. Um, yeah, yeah. First, the thing that comes to mind is, you mentioned he was always told he was dumb, and kind of my inspiring quote just for this whole journey and for UniqLearn is another one from Albert Einstein. He said, "Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid." And so I think that's exactly what our education system does to people. We have this model of what we think students should meet, right? And we think they should achieve in a specific time. But the reality is we can't judge everyone the same way because we're all so different. Um, and so that's a perfect example. And in terms of how much talent we're losing out on, I mean, I've been in classrooms the last few weeks. I mean, we hit a big milestone, and we got into our first classroom a few weeks ago, and so I was kind of there aiding in the administering of these assignments, and I went from observing a class of maybe 15 students who were not really listening to their teacher. They were talking amongst themselves over their teacher, and they just weren't engaged, to literally jumping up and down and screaming because they were so excited that I had made them assignments that were just for them. I mean, there was a line in front of me. They weren't even supposed to be asking me questions. There was a line in front of me to ask me questions about their assignments because they were just so happy that they were doing something that was interesting to them. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think it's huge. There's a story that comes to mind. I'm going to butcher the specifics of it, but it's essentially this student. He is a senior in high school, and or no, he's a junior in high school, failing his classes, literally not going to graduate. And he promised his mom he would take the SAT, and so he takes the SAT, and he's expecting nothing. He gets his score back, and it's like a 1400, right, out of 16, and
It's
he's
really
like, "Oh
good.
my God, I'm smart," right? And so he goes into his senior year with a different mindset. He's like, "Okay, I'm going to go to class," right? And so he stops hanging out with the people he was hanging out with when he wasn't going to class, and he starts applying himself, and he ends up getting into school and becoming one of the biggest magazine entrepreneurs in the world. And
Yeah.
so 15 years later, every handful of years or something, College Board goes back and reviews, and they found that year they had given the wrong score to like 10 people, and he was one of those people. And so his actual score was like a 600. And so, the guy who's telling the story on an interview or something, he's like, people might think the moral of the story is, okay, so he was always smart, he just needed a standardized test to unlock it. And that's not it, right? It's that once he started acting smart, that's when he
Hmm.
unlocked his potential. And so I think, to kind of tie it back to your question, what our education system does is it doesn't it's so strict and one size fits all and rigid that it doesn't allow for anyone other than that model student to feel smart. And
Hmm.
you have to be confident in your ability to unlock your potential.
And looking back on my life, man, I did went through a lot of self development, and I still have a competitive nature to me. Don't get me wrong, but I'm more about collaboration over competition. I look at competition with myself, trying to compete with myself. I want to get 1% better every day.
Yep.
And what also happens is this classical model, trains some students to have this kind of belief of them being very smart, and then they get egotistical and proud, feeds their ego, and they start to dominate or want to dominate, and no one else is allowed to be smart. I'm smart. And, before, because that's a great segue into a question I want to ask you. But before I get there, I kind of wanted to ask you, from my understanding, and just um, so that it's clear, it seems like what you're doing at UniqLearn is helping to not only individualize education, but also indirectly or directly, it's also trying to make sure that, like, we're not no one's falling through the cracks of our education system. Is that a fair thought?
Absolutely. I mean, one of my long-term visions that I founded the company with is a shift from a a time-based model to a proficiency-based model, right? And
Mhm.
so what we have now is this idea that, you do what you do in first grade, and pretty much regardless of what happens, you move on to second grade, and
Mhm.
so on and so forth, right? Problem there is you may have a student who, is achieving at around a 70-75% level in first grade. That's fine. I mean, they're passing, right? It's around average. It's all good. They go on to second grade, and all of a sudden there's 25 to 30% of a gap, right? And
Mm.
so, you go into second grade, it might not be that big of a deal, but as you go into third and fourth and fifth and sixth, that gap starts to compound. And so that's when students start really feeling lost and left behind. And the way that it's structured, there's not a ton of room for them to make it up, right? If they want to make it up, they have to work really hard on their own time to do that. And we just don't give students the skills and resources to do it. Um, and so kind of kids falling through the cracks, it's absolutely something that is of importance to us. I was in a classroom a few months ago, and the teacher pointed out a specific student to me, and this was a third grade student, and he goes, this guy right here, he is the best artist I've ever seen in my life. He cannot do a math problem to save his life. And I said, so why is he in this classroom feeling like he's a failure? And so I went up and I talked to him, and I was talking to him about the assignment he had in front of him, and I could just see it in his eyes and hear it in his voice. He lacked so much confidence in his ability to sit in that classroom, when the reality is he's probably better at something than every other student in that class. But there's no mold of of the model that allows him to feel like that, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so I really want students to be in the driver's seat of their own education. That's really the most general way I can put it, right? I mean, teaching people how to learn and then letting them run off with that. And this ties back to something I said in the very beginning, which is about curiosity, right? Someone can't be curious for you. You have to be uncertain. You have to inquire, and you have to discover. And and that only works if you're doing that for things that are interesting to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And life is full of paradoxes because curiosity is key. I don't disagree, and it's a curious mindset that I think is what leads people like us to do what we're doing. Um, but we also have to have the certainty that we can learn the uncertain. If that makes sense. It's kind of like what you're talking about with, the that person needed the belief that he was smart. And then as soon as he started believing he was smart, he became smart. Um, so we have to have the confidence that we can learn, but the humility to know that we don't know everything, and let's actually go ask some questions and learn. Um, one thing that I wanted to ask you is, and it's something that I don't think any of us have the answers to, but you mentioned earlier on that, the way that we score students, right? Like a test score, you know, it's well known that having a 4.0 and straight A's, like being valedictorian, for example, is not a high correlation of success in the real world. In fact, I've worked with many companies that they throw 4.0. Me myself, I don't look for 4.0 students. I look for underdogs. I want people who are hungry, who have been told no their whole life and just keep pounding at the door for more. Um Now every culture is different, but you know, I want to start with, how does UniqLearn evaluate a student in terms of metrics, if there are any metrics or if they're even important? Because I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on that. but two, the longer term consequences as we kind of move into this AI revolution and hopefully start adopting tools like UniqLearn is how are we going to derive value in our society? And what I mean by that is, if you've ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting, right? Like, um, just because
It's my
someone
favorite movie.
just because someone is super intellectually talented, does that mean that they want to be an entrepreneur and make billions of dollars? And how are we as a
Yeah, no,
society
it's a great.
going to derive value when we start having these tools that are going to give us individualized learning experiences, and students like my friend are going to not be falling through the cracks anymore? He is very happy on a $50,000 $60,000 a year salary as a high school history teacher, but cognitively, based on what I know he's capable of from being an auditory learner, there's no reason he couldn't make seven figures if he was interested in that. So
Yeah,
how are we gonna like derive value in our society and allocate resources um when 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 we're gonna start realizing, coming to this like next level consciousness of, hey, like, humans are brilliant. And if we all are allowed to reach our full potential, it's not like, oh, this person is smarter than me. It's that I'm gifted here, this person's gifted there, and I value X and this individual values Y. And so I don't believe in good or bad. There's a famous quote from Hamlet, like, there's no such thing as good or bad, only thinking makes it so. I do believe in right and wrong, though, like a moral compass. But good and bad and right and wrong to me are two different things. But the reason I bring that up is, as long as people are valuing things that are morally right or morally righteous, how are we as a society going to change? Because right now our system of economics is not built for that type of profound leap in consciousness.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely not. Glad you bring up Good Will Hunting because that's my favorite movie. But to kind of go back to the first part of your question, which is how do we assess students? What are our metrics? Just to kind of validate and highlight the problem that you bring up, 13% of K through 12 educators think that like A through F grading is a very effective way to do it. 13%.
Yeah.
87% of educators think that it's not good. And so that to me, that's all I need to say in terms of the education system needing change and not listening to its teachers. Um, so in terms of how we look at it at UniqLearn, we really look at it through the lens of like a skills taxonomy, right? So we don't
Hmm.
want to understand, okay, what grade did you get in Algebra 1? What grade did you get in your sixth grade English class, right? What's your creative thinking like? Are you able to stimulate your own thoughts? Are you able to stimulate your own curiosity? How's your problem solving? That doesn't mean math, right? That means, are you presented an issue in a video game that you're playing or outside when you're playing with your friends? And are you able to go about it in a logical and reasonable way? Right? And so the way that we do that is our machine learning algorithms that underlie these profiles and these models extract data from every student input. So every time a student turns in their personalized assignment, these algorithms go in and look at what is being written, right? And so the nature of these models is language. And so
Hmm.
it's able to derive kind of more intuitive and qualitative aspects of a student's behavior um, to assess those things, right? So it's not quantitative. It's not, oh, these five problems on this 20 question assignment are aimed at critical thinking. How many did you get right? Okay, that's your grade for it, right? It's really understanding how they're thinking of something and assessing it in a qualitative way. So that's how we look at it. And of course, we still need to adhere to the universal idea of grades and things like that because no school is going to take something that they can't grade their students on and then have their students use that to get into college, right? That's just the reality of the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, we grade on rubrics and things like that. But kind of the next step for of what we offer is that qualitative aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then to go to the second part, Will Hunting, genius, right? Solving those problems in the hallway and then doesn't even want anyone to know it's him. And that professor, and here's where it's important. That professor is forcing him to do that math, right? You can see throughout the movie that Will is getting really frustrating. He ends up burning the work, right? He burns it right in front of the professor, because that's not what is important to him. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, do we hate to see someone not use their potential? Sure, but at the end of the day, this is really about doing what you're passionate about and what you care about, and you can have other strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, is Will a math genius? Absolutely, but he has other things that he can be great at and that he wants to be great at. And so kind of my mission and my goal is to give students the ability and the skill set to have those options, right? To understand what they're good at, understand how to get good at something, and do what they care about.
You bring up an interesting thought, and I kind of had I guess, a revelation or a thought myself was maybe that's the way to go. And I think you're entering into this market at the perfect time because, we can talk about how we're on the cusp of a total rejection of the education system. And I would say for you, I wouldn't worry too much because if the education system rejects you, it may not be this very moment, but it's not far off where you're going to have an opportunity to build your own education system if you so choose, because people don't want to go to college anymore. It's too
Yeah.
expensive. It's putting people in debt, and I would challenge the administrators, if any are listening to this, and anyone who can be a champion for you inside of school districts, to really open their minds up and say, like, hey, like, let's maybe work with Aiden, because if we don't, it really could be to our destruction if we don't, like, open up and at least try some new things to bring down the cost, and make it work somehow, some way. Because what I'm starting to see in my mind, and I actually think it might be the way of the future, or a way to at least explore if it could work, is rather than put like a number, a numerical grade on assignments, um you use a skills based taxonomy that's personality based, has a psychological profile, but also takes the input from the student themselves. Ask them, like, through surveys, or however it works, of what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, and it says, like, hey, based on your assessment, it ranks very similar to these personality types, and these personality types correlate very highly in these different professions. I can speak. One of the things that TCU did, in the honors program I was in, that I'm very thankful for, is they made us do, is it called Myers-Briggs or Briggs-Meyer test? It's a
Yep.
personality profile, and I found out I'm an ENTJ, and essentially it's a field marshal. And it told me I'd be a really good management consultant. I'd be really good in entrepreneurship based on my personality profile. And I look at my life, and that's where I've always gravitated towards. And had I known that earlier on, I probably could have avoided some of the pain and suffering I went trying to fit in someone else's box, when I, was like, okay, I'm just going to listen to my parents. I'm just going to be a CPA. It's not that, like, accounting doesn't interest me. I'm very good at it. There's a component of it that interests me, but my personality is much bigger than to be put in this one little box and say, okay, you're going to be a CPA, and you're going to count the debits and credits for the rest of your life. If you told me that, it makes me want to pull my hair out, because I'm bored. And I don't want to be bored. And so, like, if we start doing that at a younger age, saying, hey, these are your skills, this is your personality, this is what you say you're passionate about, we're not telling you have to go in these professions, but based on, our thousands and thousands and millions upon millions of data points, we think you'd be most interested in these fields. Maybe you should consider. And maybe that's how we start deriving
Yeah.
value
Well,
and shifting the economic system.
so where that gets difficult is, you know, one of the things we want to do is catalyze intrinsic motivation, right? And
Hmm.
so there's another large body of research that says if you're extrinsically motivated, it is very, very likely that as soon as something becomes difficult, you will stop pursuing it, right? Because the only reason you're doing it is for external circumstances, external reasons, right? And so we never want to say to a student, "Hey, this is what you're good at. Go do this." And so you did say, you don't have to, right? But here's what our data points show, and kind of our thinking behind it is we want students to get there themselves, right?
Hmm.
We don't want to put this list in front of them and say, hey, based on your skills, these are the jobs that would probably line up well for you, right? We want them to understand their skills, right? They can look at their own profile. They can see their skills, their strengths, their weaknesses, how to improve them, how to use their strengths. And then they can kind of go out and pursue that list on their own, right? And critically think about what would make sense and what they care about. And so in terms of
Right.
deriving value, it probably would be good in a sense to match that, right? Because we could derive some serious value, but at the same time we want to be very careful about what we're telling people to do and what we're giving them the ability to do. You know what I mean?
Right. And so what I mean by deriving value though isn't so much as like your company deriving its own EV enterprise value. I'm just saying as a
Hmm.
society itself, our economic system is tailored to, okay, this person made these grades, went to this university, made these grades at this university. Okay, they meet our standards to come get this entry level job at 70, 80K a year. And if you start at 70, 80K a year, in big four accounting, then your trajectory is like this. But, if you didn't make those grades and you start at like 40K and you start in like education, then like, honestly, if we look at like the salaries and stuff, the trajectory is like this. It's more flat because like you start at like 40K a year and you get like 2%. You're probably lucky to crack six figures as an educator, unless you go into administration, but then you're going back and getting another degree, right? So it's not the same. That's my point, is like we've developed this economic system that is deriving value and allocating resources, allocating value to human capital based on the A through F grade scale. And you're proposing a totally new type of system, or at least a complementary system that can maybe help the A through F grade scale, you know, bring it up a notch. But like,
Yeah.
it's similar with healthcare, man. Like once we start like really revolutionizing healthcare education, these large industries that touch all sorts of people, we're gonna have to rethink our entire society. There's no getting around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
I
that's kind of
mean,
like,
it's
and I
no,
don't
no. I mean,
expect you to have the answers. I'm posing it just existentially to anyone who's listening,
yeah,
because, like, dude, it's going to be our generations in the next 5 to 10 years that right now, people like you and I are already starting to wrestle with these questions. But over the next 3, 5, 10 years, over the next decade, it's going to be me, your generation, that are not just wrestling with the questions, but we're going to have to come together and we're going to have to come up with some answers.
yeah,
And they're not easy
absolutely.
questions.
And no, they're not easy questions, and often the important ones never are, right? Um, but yeah, I think it's really just about thinking, what do we want the truth to be, and what needs to be true for that to happen, right? And so I think that's how that's how we approach product development, right? I mean, if we want the outcome to be this, what needs to be true? And I
Hmm.
think it's the way to approach larger issues too. Like if this is the outcome you desire, what do you need to do to make that happen? And so, going back to an earlier point that we touched on is writing things down, right? Write down that big overarching desire at the top of the page, break it down little by little into actionable steps, right?
Yep.
I think where we go wrong and where people struggle talking about education and issues across all industries is we say this really big thing, right? This really big thing is that education sucks, right? But that's not helpful. That's not productive for anyone, right? Why does
Right.
education suck? And so, kind of breaking it down into how we can actually go about changing it, and that's when change will start.
Well, Aiden, man, I think that's a perfect way to end. Um, and I want to have you back on because there's so much more left to unpack. Uh, we definitely need to do a round two. So thank you so much, man. Thank you for what
Yeah,
you're
I'd love
doing
to.
for the industry. It takes a lot of courage to be an entrepreneur. And I know we'll continue talking between us, but I want you to know that I wish you all the best success, and I can't wait to see where you take your company.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I mean, this was super fun. Definitely would love to come back on, and I appreciate your enthusiasm just behind everything you talk about. It's cool to be around inspiring people and inspired people. So yeah, I really appreciate it, Sean.